Hello and welcome to Diana's ra- radio internet plays. This is a response and reflection as to different things on internet. Tonight I was watching Filing Line on June 13th, 2025 on PBS channel 10.1, and there was this discussion about market craft. Well, with market craft, um, it talked about one of the co-founders of Facebook and his thoughts from his latest book. And the thing what's interesting about it is basically came up a discussion of Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. This was written in 1996, and the speaker on Facebook mentioned this was when he was 13. At the time that this was in 1996, let's see, I would have been 33. And I remember at the time basically on news groups and internet how we talked about different things. And that's part of the reason why the figures seeing are my news groups of 1991. And the browser I used back then was called Lynx because Netscape wasn't available to use on a VAX 11750. So we used a text-based browser called Lynx. And my news groups were Comp AI Neural Nets, Alt Transgender, Social Support Transgender, Alt Stories TG, Alt Fan Fiction, X Files, and VR5. Also, there's a group called Alt Announcer. When you came on news group, you announced yourself that hey, I'm on this news group. I hail from UW Parkside. I'm using the server at UW Parkside, and like to welcome myself, and I accept the code of conduct that exists. Now, the code of conduct back then is different than what exists on social media today because many things that are done on social media today would have caused many people in the news groups not to be able to post in the news group. Although the news groups were very open and very liberal compared today with the alt groups that were established in 1972, many people think internet only came by 1996. Actually, internet was established in 1969. My family had internet since 1971, albeit we at that time many of us used a teletype uh, ASR 33 with a punch tape and punch reader connected to GE time sharing service in Milwaukee. And even to have GE time sharing service, you had to be vetted. You had to have a good credit record. It wasn't just that basically you had money, you had to be vetted. You had to also conduct yourself properly and demonstrate that you could. So money was not the main point as it is today. Well, when I think about discussion on firing line regarding Section 230, I agree with the presenter that Section 230 needs to be amended or basically changed. That basically certain corporate social media sites have to be responsible for the content that they post. And why would I say this? Because I support the Electronic Freedom Foundation. I support many different open-minded groups. But why would I say this? Because um, in evaluating different types of the law, like even the Second Amendment and the right of arms, um, what I've heard is that two schools of thought. Those that evaluate the law as it exists in today's society, and those who evaluate the law as it was written at the time it was written. I'm of the second group. I believe in evaluating the law and the Constitution at the time that it was originally written. When you consider the Communication Decency Act at the time that it was written in 1996, that time I was 33 years old, like I said, and I remember even watching an episode of Slider where it showed basically where information was hidden, and then because of basically then the Communication Decency Act, the Constitution was able to be proliferated in a dystopian world all over the planet, and freedom was restored. Well, at the time that this Communication Decency Act was written, as mentioned on Fireline, the primary media at that time considering the act that was enforced for cable TV, and it was meant to regulate cable TV. Um, However, when you look at internet at the time, internet was not corporate. Internet was a collection of a bunch of universities, a bunch of academic engineering groups that put together. There's no such thing as a corporate board, no stockholders, no stakeholders, um, no dividends. So, and also no server farms. So most of the time when you posted a news group, many times many universities had a policy, like at Parkside, they had a policy was called the ephemeral policy. So anything you posted basically would disappear in 4 days. Because the reason why they did that is they realized sometimes students, as a student, you post stuff, and years later you don't want to be reminded about how you thought back then or something. So it was eliminated in 4 days. There are no server farms. And even when you went on the chat group, like the different transgender support groups, different story groups that are still in existence, even the chat rooms, they didn't keep the chat logs because basically what the chat was, and it just disappeared as soon as the chat ended. Um, Now, for the Communication Decency Act, Section 230 was fine at that time because since there's no corporate ownership of news groups. News groups were basically the logs disappeared. Basically, ephemeral policies, no dividends, no selling of information, um, no cataloging of people's posts or anything else, or reselling them or giving them over to different types of investigative um, organizations or other things. That was fine. And but at one point, basically, when hints of internet being becoming corporatized, or having corporate intrusion, that's when a non-pennant FI form, a non-dependent FI form, as an anonymous way to send messages, basically to protect your identity. And this was very important for people in the LGBT community and people and other free thinkers because the internet provided a safety valve because basically for many people in the 90s you could be gay and lesbian, be out in many states, but if you were bi, lesbian, or transgender, you were dead meat. Basically, by religious groups, by employers, by social service, by police departments, and other things, because at that time, the DSM-1 still considered basically if you weren't gay or lesbian, you had some sort of mental defect. And it wasn't changed until basically DSM-2 came out, and then quickly 3 and 4 basically by 1997, by let's see, 4 by 1999, and 5 by 2008, like that though. And the problem that occurred like that though is basically um, the CDA Section 230 work to protect people who are bi lesbian and transgender, and basically it's not something that people do. It's something that's meant. It is a medical condition, but in that case, at the time that the Communication Decency Act was written, it was written for the problem at that time. However, at the time is when it was not written to protect corporations. It's written to protect private individuals and private small groups that weren't monetized, making money, charging money, selling information, or anything else, and also had a policy of basically not keeping records on people, as basically many people use social media are told now to be very careful what you post because that record will exist forever. So this is the reason why I agree that basically the Communication Decency Act Section 230 either needs to be amended, or basically the protection of corporate social media sites not to be responsible for the postings should be lifted. that they are responsible for the postings, because since this information can be sold, since this information can be disseminated and other things, um, that's why I feel the CD of 96, Section 230, the protection against corporate social media should no longer exist. And also, I agree that basically the breakup of different social media things have existed, because in my previous radio podcast on some musings from the summer of 2008, um, some sort of Justice Department consent decree needs to be put on, like the way a consent decree was put on IBM in the 1950s, and especially in 1966 with the IBM 360 fiasco that occurred, and that wasn't lifted until I think the late 1980s, 87 if I'm correct. And the problem is, um, back then the field was the big East Coast uh, um, tech giants, basically those concentrated in Boston, New York, Maryland, and that though, New England. Um, and at that time, the government did work with the consent decree, because basically the government was still able to have power to do such stuff. But when the new, quote, friendly tech companies formed in the 70s and promised not to imitate what their former brethren had done, and now people are suspected that they have, um, this is why basically Section 230 needs to be amended or eliminated regarding protections from corporate social media to allow um, non-prosecution for what they publish, and also for the information they store. Like in the European Union, there's a law that basically social media companies have very strict things as to how they can store information, and also they have to share that information with the person without fee, and also eliminate that information if the person requests it. And this goes back to World War II, when the Nazis used shoe cards to sort of finger people, undesirable people. And this is what people are concerning, that this is becoming like the new shoe card thing of that this information, and that's why Section 230 is being discussed today. So um, I agree with the speaker. Section 230 needs to be altered or abolished, and the protections that current corporate social media sites have under Section 230 should not be allowed anymore, as well as to break up with some sort of justice consent decree, which is similar to what was done with IBM in the 1950s and 1960s through the 1980s, if that can still be done. But this time with the big tech companies on the West Coast to a stronger degree, and basically not lifted, because basically some suspect that what has been done, it hasn't been done enough. And people have a right to privacy, people have a right to freedom. Also, people have a right to live their lives. And when information is disseminated, this impacts on quality of life, because as the one speaker on Firing Line mentioned, that the first three goals to make the country better is lower housing, lower food, lower education and health. I think he included as a part of the third, going back to I think of the old HEW, health, education, and welfare. And how's the easiest way to do that? Well, first thing is basically there's too much private information about individuals that are available to credit card companies, credit reporting, that justify credit card companies to charge extra higher interest rates, auto insurance companies to charge people extra higher auto insurance rates, because even what you post on social media, suspect of what you post on social media, or other things may affect your credit rating, which increases your auto insurance, or even or a suspected post may label you as a bad insurance risk. So this is the reason why Section 230, that corporate social media can post and not be prosecuted for the posting or selling of the information. That's why that protection should no longer exist. And I agree with the speaker on this. So when we think about internet, I tend to evaluate a law at the time as when. At the time as when Section 230 addressed the issue of internet when it was non-corporate. But since internet is mostly corporate now, at the law as exists, Section 230 as exists in 1996 needs to be altered or abolished, as the one speaker mentioned that in filing line tonight, June 13, 2025. Well, let me know what you think. The best way to reach me is on Facebook, X, Pinterest, and YouTube. And this has been a presentation of Diana Radio Theater, a speculative report based upon current events.